Some cars are just bad, others are an eyesore. From mind-bogglingly stupid designs to some of the ugliest cars ever built, these 12 disasters will make you wonder, what were they thinking? You've never seen anything like this. I was the proud owner of the one and only 1954 Briggs and Stratton hybrid, and let me tell you, it was both a glorious engineering curiosity and a complete disaster in motion. If you've ever heard of a car that was way ahead of its time, only to fall flat on its face, this is it. The idea behind it was groundbreaking, a six-wheeled hybrid, an innovative fusion of steam and electric power. But in reality, this car was more like a rolling science experiment than an actual functioning vehicle. Let's start with the hybrid powertrain, because that's where things got really interesting. Or should I say absurd. In theory, a combination of an 18-horsepower gasoline engine and a 4-horsepower electric motor sounds like something that would have impressed people in the 1950s. I mean, we're talking about a hybrid before hybrids were even a thing. The idea was to get the best of both worlds, fuel efficiency from the electric motor and the power of a gasoline engine for speed. In practice, it was the epitome of underwhelming. Together, those two engines produced a grand total of 22 horsepower, which was nowhere near enough to move a car of any real size. The best way to describe driving it is that it felt like the car was perpetually in the process of waking up from a nap. There was no urgency, no power. When I floored the accelerator, the car would lazily think about responding. Then maybe, just maybe, it would creep forward. Acceleration was about as fast as a toddler learning to walk, and you could forget about the top speed. On a good day with a tailwind, the car might hit 45 miles per hour, but it was more likely to spend most of its time at a glacial pace, which made it feel more like a science fair project on wheels than a car. But what really got to me was the hybrid system's reliability. This wasn't a modern electric car with seamless integration between the two powertrains. No, this was a 50s-era experiment, which meant that the system would constantly get confused. There were times when I'd press the accelerator and the car would do nothing. Just sit there, like it was pondering the meaning of life. Eventually, it would decide whether to use the gasoline engine or the electric motor, but in the meantime, I felt like I was living in some strange limbo. You couldn't really rely on either engine to work when you needed it, and when both decided to work together, it was a slow-motion disaster. And let's talk about the design. Oh boy, the design. If you think modern hybrids look odd, this car was like someone took a bathtub, a bread box, and a soap dispenser, glued them together and said, let's make a car. It was awkwardly bulbous, stretched out with 6 wheels that looked like they belonged on a monster truck. If that monster truck had been designed by someone who had no concept of speed or aerodynamics. People didn't stare in awe, they stared because they were genuinely unsure if they were witnessing the future or a glorified prank. One guy at a gas station asked if I had invented a time machine, because it was just so far out of left field. It wasn't even close to looking like a car that could exist in 1954. It looked like a cartoon version of the future. Now let's talk about those 6 wheels. The concept was that 6 wheels would provide better traction and stability. In reality, they just made the car feel twice as sluggish. Turning the car was a whole production. The steering felt like you were trying to steer a small yacht. You couldn't park it without a massive amount of space because it felt like a land yacht that had no business being on regular roads. When you made a turn, it wasn't a smooth, fluid motion. It was like trying to pivot a giant sofa on wheels. And the ride quality, let's just say it made you feel like you were in the middle of an endless earthquake. The suspension was so soft that every bump felt like a minor collision. One time I hit a pothole and the car bounced so much I thought I was going to launch into another dimension. It was comical at best, nauseating at worst. Now don't get me wrong, I have to give Briggs and Stratton credit where it's due. They had a vision for the future, a future where cars could use both gas and electric power. The problem was that the technology wasn't there yet. The idea was brilliant, but the execution was like watching someone try to build a space rocket out of tinfoil and duct tape. It was unfinished, underpowered, and completely impractical. In the end, I wasn't heartbroken when I sold it. The Briggs and Stratton hybrid was never meant to be a practical car, and it certainly wasn't the future of automotive innovation. It was a prototype, and it stayed a prototype. One was built, and that was more than enough. It wasn't just ahead of its time, it was out of its time. And frankly, it would have been better off staying in the history books as a curiosity rather than a rolling disaster. But hey, at least I got the chance to own a piece of automotive history. Owning the 1957 Aurora safety car was one of the most surreal experiences of my life, and frankly, one of the most baffling. If ever there were a car that embodied the gap between theory and execution, this was it. Designed by a Catholic priest, yes, a priest, who wanted to create the safest car ever made, the Aurora was an engineering marvel on paper. In reality, it was a rolling disaster, a vehicle that looked like a melting jelly bean with a giant underbite and performed like a car built out of sheer optimism without regard for practicality. Let's start with the design. The Aurora was meant to have a body that absorbed shock in the event of a crash. The idea was innovative, a car that cocooned its passengers in a reinforced shell, protecting them from all harm. But instead of a sleek, futuristic design, the result was a bizarre-looking monstrosity that resembled nothing so much as a half-melted jelly bean with an absurdly large front end. The front looked like it had a permanent underbite, which made the car look more like a cartoon character than something you'd want to drive down the road. Every time I parked it, I'd get stares from people who couldn't decide if they were looking at a science fiction prop or a failed concept car. The car was built with a philosophy of protection, but the execution was, frankly, disastrous. The Aurora's shape was part of the safety design. It was intended to crumple and absorb impact in a way that would protect passengers better than anything else on the road. But in reality, it was as if they'd taken a baking pan, tried to shape it into a car, and hoped that the universe would just make it work. The materials used in its construction felt cheap, and the reinforced body didn't actually feel all that solid. Rather than giving me a sense of safety, it felt like I was driving around in a car that was made of recycled aluminum cans. And I wasn't entirely convinced the thing wouldn't collapse in on itself if it hit anything at all. Then there was the performance, which was even worse than the car's appearance. The Aurora was powered by a modestly underpowered engine that was far from impressive. The thing had the same punch as a hamster in a wheel trying to generate some speed. I'm not even sure if I could classify it as a car in the usual sense, because it was agonizingly slow. Every time I tried to accelerate, it felt like the car was struggling to make up its mind whether it wanted to go or just sit there and think about going. The drive was lethargic, the handling sluggish, and the whole experience was akin to driving a cart with square wheels. It just didn't move in a way that inspired confidence. If I wanted to speed up, I'd have to floor the accelerator, and even then I might not see much of a difference. The car was impossibly slow, and considering it was meant to be the safest on the road, I couldn't help but wonder if it was the safest because nothing would ever happen with it. It couldn't go fast enough to get into any trouble. And don't get me started on the reliability. This car broke down constantly. I've never had a more frustrating ownership experience. The car seemed to be perpetually in the shop. Whether it was the electric system, the hydraulics, or some other part of the mysterious contraption they'd cobbled together, it was always in need of repair. And since only one was ever made, finding parts for it was practically impossible. I spent more time waiting for parts to arrive and getting the car fixed than actually driving it. The joke I used to make was that it was more of a museum exhibit than a car. I should have just put it on display instead of driving it. It seemed to have been built for the purpose of never being used. Speaking of the repairs, when I could get the car into a garage, the mechanics would always look at it with a mixture of awe and disbelief. It was like they had opened a time capsule and found a failed automotive experiment from an alternate universe. Everything was different. The hydraulic systems were so complex, they might as well have been written in a foreign language. And the parts used were often one of a kind. They were like something out of a mad scientist's workshop. The fact that the company went bankrupt after producing only one of these should come as no surprise. They were selling a dream, but the reality was a rolling nightmare. Then came the cop. The Aurora wasn't just another quirky vehicle, it was expensive. They marketed it as a premium safety vehicle, And so it came with a price tag that made even the most lavish Cadillacs look affordable. I spent more money on this monstrosity than I'd ever care to admit, only to find myself with a broken down and poorly built car that didn't do anything well except suck up money. I still can't believe this car was even made. One Aurora safety car was built, and honestly, I think that was one too many. It was a bold, well-intentioned concept that never had a chance in reality. Owning the 1908 Tasco prototype is like being handed a time machine from an alternate dimension, where science fiction meets reality. Except the fiction part is way more apparent than the reality. Picture this. You're driving a car that looks like a road-going airplane but can't actually fly. It's an outlandish, bizarre hybrid that exists more in the realm of unrealized dreams than functional engineering. Let's dive deeper into the design and how truly weird this car is. The idea behind the Tasco was to create something futuristic, something that resembled an airplane more than a car. Enclosed front wheels, a cabin more akin to an aircraft's cockpit, these were the hallmarks of its visionary design. But here's the catch. The design looked more like someone overshot their mark and tried to pack an entire jet engine into a tiny constricting body. The front wheels were encased, supposedly for aerodynamics, but this gave the car the appearance of a bizarre, bloated bug rather than a sleek and efficient automobile. The cockpit-style cabin, with its narrow, confined space, was uncomfortable at best and downright claustrophobic at worst. It felt like trying to navigate a pilot's seat with no control over the skies. Everything about the interior screamed aeronautical, but it didn't scream practical. You were effectively sitting in what felt like a miniature spacecraft, but without the smoothness of flight or any of the comfort a modern car might offer. You had to brace yourself just to make it through a bumpy ride, which was made even worse by the fact that the car's handling was about as good as trying to drive a brick in a windstorm. The whole setup felt far more awkward than anything resembling fun or efficient driving. And that's where the real problem lies. It wasn't actually an airplane, nor was it a practical car. The Tasco's design might have been futuristic for its time, but it completely missed the mark on practicality and usability. It's almost like the designers were so focused on creating an aerodynamic masterpiece that they forgot cars are supposed to be about more than just looking good. Sure, the idea of an airplane-inspired road car sounds innovative, but when that idea leads to a mangled, bulky design, the results speak for themselves. It looked like someone had taken the wings off a plane, stretched it out, and slapped some wheels on it, expecting it to perform like a regular car. Now, driving the Tasco prototype was like trying to pilot an ungraceful flying contraption, but grounded and without the grace. The cockpit felt cramped and uncomfortable, and the car's top-heavy structure made steering it a total nightmare. It's like attempting to steer a clunky flying machine down the road, but it's just not responding the way you'd expect. The enclosed wheels, which might have seemed like a smart idea at first glance, did nothing to enhance the car's maneuverability. It was like trying to drive a rolling fortress, complete with the suspension of a rock and the cornering ability of a struggling ship. The whole thing felt like trying to control a wobbly kite on wheels, a disastrous and awkward experience that's far removed from anything resembling easy driving. The sad part? This vehicle's aesthetic failure was matched only by its total lack of practicality. It's easy to get excited about the idea of a road-going airplane when you've got grand ambitions, but in execution, the car was a monstrous design flaw. Sure, it was visually unique, but that's where the positives stopped. The entire vehicle came across as more of a concept car gone terribly wrong than anything that could realistically function as transportation. Even the creators had to acknowledge this by limiting the production to just one prototype. And when that prototype itself was such a disaster, you start to wonder why anyone even thought this was a good idea in the first place. So what's the legacy of the Tasco prototype? Well, in short, it's a curiosity, a bizarre footnote in automotive history, a failed dream that was ultimately a victim of poor design choices and overly ambitious thinking. The Tasco is a symbol of how sometimes innovation isn't about being the most futuristic or visionary. Sometimes it's about understanding what works and what doesn't. The Tasco may have been a bold attempt at changing the future of automobiles, But in the end, it's a cautionary tale of how one outrageous idea can result in a flawed mess that only works as a quirky historical relic. Only one prototype was ever built, and quite frankly, that was probably for the best. This flying car dream was a nightmare for anyone who thought they could get behind the wheel. The 1951 Hoffman three-wheeler is one of those cars that almost feels like a joke, a bizarre concept that makes you wonder what the engineers were thinking when they designed it. Imagine a car so backward in its engineering, it practically begs for explanation, or better yet, excuses. This tiny German vehicle was an experiment gone wrong, a half-baked idea that somehow made it to reality, albeit with only one ever being built. And when you look at its design, you start to realize just how far off the mark the idea really was. Let's start with the most outrageous feature, the rear wheel steering system. Normally, when you steer a car, the front wheels move, guiding the car where you want it to go. But in the Hoffman three-wheeler, the rear wheels turned. This was a critical design flaw that made the car handle like a shopping cart that had been set loose in a mall. Now imagine yourself behind the wheel of this oddity, trying to navigate a tight corner. Instead of the front wheels obediently following your direction, the rear wheels jerk and shift beneath you, and the car responds like it's being controlled by a drunken puppet. Instead of gliding smoothly into a turn, it lurches and fights you every step of the way. It's like trying to steer a tumbleweed in a windstorm, completely uncontrollable, unstable, and downright dangerous at any speed above a crawl. You didn't drive the car drove you, and more often than not, it drove you straight into the realm of frustration and panic. But wait, the fun doesn't stop with the steering. There's also the gear shift, which was designed to be as awkward and impractical as possible. In a regular car, shifting gears is an easy, intuitive process. You reach for the gear lever, make your choice, and off you go. But in the Hoffman three-wheeler, you had to reach behind the seat to find the gear lever. Yes, behind the seat. Imagine the sheer awkwardness of that setup, stretching your arm backward while trying to maintain control over a car that already wants to twist and spin in every direction, but the one you want. It's not just uncomfortable, it's borderline impossible to operate smoothly. It's a design flaw that screams inefficiency and frustration, a feature that could make anyone give up on trying to drive it after a few minutes. Then there's the issue of handling. While rear wheel steering was already a bizarre concept, it was only made worse by the fact that the car had only three wheels. Without the stability of a fourth wheel, every movement, every turn felt like an exercise in balancing a high-speed unicycle. The car was incredibly unstable, and it was as though the engineers had decided that balance and control were optional. Every slight shift in direction resulted in the car's body leaning one way or another, making it feel like you were riding a rudderless boat on a rough sea. It was less like driving and more like trying to control a wobbling object that didn't want to stay upright. At this point, you might start to question who thought this was a good idea. The Hoffman three-wheeler was designed at a time when cars were starting to become more refined, with smooth suspensions and precise handling. But this car was stuck in an alternate universe where the rules of common sense didn't apply. If you ever saw someone driving it, you'd swear they were part of a science fiction experiment, not an actual road user. It's like someone took a bet to see if they could build the most unpredictable, dangerous, and awkward vehicle on the road, and somehow succeeded beyond expectations. It's not just that the Hoffman three-wheeler was poorly engineered. It's that it refused to be practical in any sense. From the rear wheel steering that made you feel like you were driving a shopping cart ad OCM, to the impossible gear shifting design that had you practically doing gymnastics to change gears. This car was an exercise in extreme discomfort. It wasn't built to last, nor was it built to be a useful car. It was simply a failed experiment, a design that couldn't have been further from the intention of a drivable car. And the reality? Only one Hoffman three-wheeler was ever made. The world rejected it almost immediately. It was like an engineering mistake that never should have been approved, a creation that ultimately serves as a museum piece for bad design. There was no market for it, no one clamored for more, and the world quickly moved on to functional cars that actually worked. This car wasn't just impractical, it was dangerous, frustrating, and ultimately just a bad idea from the start. it's no surprise it was quickly forgotten, slipping into history as a cautionary tale of what happens when you let reckless engineering run wild. So, the Hoffman three-wheeler stands as a warning, a reminder that sometimes innovation doesn't just fail, it crashes and burns spectacularly, leaving behind only absurd designs and questionable decisions. It's a car that, in a very literal sense, the 1970 Marcos Mantis M70 was the kind of car that tried to redefine the definition of style, but ended up doing just the opposite. Imagine a British sports car designed with all the ambition in the world to make an impression, but ultimately, it only left confusion in its wake. If the idea was to wow with futuristic design, then the execution was more about creating a monstrosity that defied not just conventional aesthetics, but also logic itself. This was no sleek, polished beauty. It was more like a deformed spaceship that had crash-landed into the world of classic cars. Let's start with the front end, the part of the car that should have been its bold, attention-grabbing feature. Instead, it was a bizarre combination of weirdly bulging headlights and a nose that seemed as though it was designed with no regard for symmetry. Imagine a car trying to be aggressive, futuristic, and sleek all at once, but instead the result was a design that looked like a caterpillar trying to impersonate a sports car. The headlights, which should have added a sharp, dynamic element, ended up looking like strange eyes, almost too large, unsettling, and out of place in a car that was supposed to embody grace and speed. The nose, long and awkwardly stretched, didn't help. It looked like an elongated mistake, a design that felt like it was an afterthought rather than a feature. The overall proportion of the car felt off, with the front looking far too big and heavy compared to the rest of the body, leaving you wondering what exactly was going on with the aerodynamics. Moving to the roofline, it's clear that someone tried to make the Marcos Mantis M70 look sleek, but ended up with a squashed bug. It's as though someone took a classic sports car silhouette, then tried to crush it into a space that was a little too tight. Instead of flowing and graceful lines, the roofline sagged in an almost unnatural way, giving the car a look of discomfort. The idea was there to create a low-slung, sporty profile, but instead, it just looked awkward and unnatural, like a car trying to fit into a mold it wasn't meant for. It wasn't the futuristic vision it was supposed to be. It was a misstep, with design features that seemed to contradict each other at every turn. And what about the overall aesthetic of the car? The Mantis M70 wanted to scream exclusivity and style, but instead, it whispered something closer to quirky and unsettling. It looked like it was trying so hard to be unique that it forgot what made beautiful cars: balance, proportion, and a timeless quality. What should have been sharp lines and sophistication turned into bulging, clashing angles that left you scratching your head. Instead of a well-rounded, iconic design, you had something that looked like it fell off the drawing board halfway through the process, with unfinished elements and a sense of confusion about what it was trying to be. What's even more surprising is that only 32 of these cars were ever made, a testament to the fact that, despite the effort put into its creation, the Marcos Mantis M70 was not the masterpiece the company envisioned. There was clearly potential in the idea of a British sports car with a cutting-edge design, but the execution faltered so badly that the car quickly faded into obscurity. In fact, it was abandoned altogether by the company as they realized that it wasn't just a commercial failure, but a design disaster. In the world of car enthusiasts, the Mantis M70 has become a curiosity, a rare oddity that raises the question, what were they thinking? It's the kind of car that can only be appreciated from the perspective of history, a reminder of how even the best intentions can be derailed by misguided design. What was meant to be a sports car with style ended up being a disjointed jumble of features, a car that couldn't decide if it wanted to be sleek, aggressive, or elegant, and in the end, it failed to be any of those things. So the 1970 Marcos Mantis M70 stands as a cautionary tale of design ambition gone terribly wrong. It's a car that had the right idea, but missed the mark so badly that it's now nothing more than a footnote in the history of strange vehicles. Only 32 were made, and today they're mostly forgotten. Their awkward, bug-like shapes fading into the background of automotive history. A car that promised the world but delivered an unforgettable lesson in how not to build a sports car. The 1959 Scimitar concept car, also known as the Ogle SX250, is a perfect example of futuristic ambition clashing with an utter lack of refinement. It was supposed to be a high-end, cutting-edge vehicle, showcasing the best of what automotive design could offer in the late 50s. Instead, it looked like a toddler's doodle of a car, one that was equal parts awkward and confusing. Its design was meant to wow with modernity, but instead, it left you scratching your head, wondering if someone accidentally left a sketchbook out and let a child draw the next big thing in luxury. Let's talk about the windshield first. It's hard to imagine a more bizarre feature than this massive sloped windshield that dominated the front of the car. In an attempt to look futuristic, it made the car appear more like a spaceship than a vehicle designed to drive on Earth. The huge glass curve created a cockpit-like feel, but instead of looking sleek, it just looked out of place. It gave the whole car a fishbowl effect, as though the driver and passengers were trapped in a strange bubble, trying to get from point A to point B, but unable to figure out how to actually drive it. Then there was the rear bubble. In the world of automotive design, the rear end of a car is crucial to its overall aesthetic balance. The Scimitar? Not so much. Its awkward bubble stuck out like an afterthought, as though the designers were trying to add a curved space-age element, but it ended up looking like a deflated balloon that had been awkwardly bolted to the back of a car. It gave the car a top-heavy, unbalanced look that made you question whether the rear end was going to tip over on the road at any moment. The proportions felt all wrong, and instead of looking sleek and aerodynamic, it just looked bloated and disjointed. But it wasn't just the oversized elements that made the Scimitar look ridiculous. The tiny grille at the front, which should have been an imposing feature on a high-end concept, was more like a tiny, odd-shaped mouth. It made the car look like an alien's face, and not in the cool sci-fi sense. The proportions were all off. The body was large and expansive, but the grille was almost childishly small, giving it a quirky, unappealing look. The tiny grille didn't just look weird, it made the car feel incomplete, as if the designers forgot to finish the front of the vehicle and decided that a tiny hole for the engine cooling system would do. The mismatch between the large body and the tiny grille was one of many elements that made the car look like a clumsy design that never quite figured out what it wanted to be. Inside, the Ogle SX250 didn't fare much better. While it tried to present itself as a luxury car, it felt like a dystopian version of a high-end vehicle. The interior was as awkward as the exterior, with a layout that didn't make any sense and design choices that screamed lack of cohesion. The futuristic intentions didn't translate into comfort or practicality. There was nothing about the interior that made you feel like you were stepping into a vehicle of the future. Instead, it was more like a science experiment gone wrong. The car's futuristic vision, with a combination of strange proportions, an overly ambitious windshield, and a clunky bubble rear end, never found its audience. Only one prototype was ever made, and after it was completed, nobody wanted it. Despite being designed with high hopes to revolutionize automotive design, the Scimitar ended up as an expensive failure. The car was an example of conceptual overreach, where the idea of creating something futuristic overpowered the basic principles of good design. The result was a car that looked like it came from another planet, one where the laws of good taste and practicality didn't apply. Today, the 1959 Scimitar concept car is a curious footnote in automotive history. It's often remembered as a failure of ambition, a car that tried to do too much and ended up being little more than an oddity. It wasn't futuristic in the way it was intended to be. It was more like a weird artifact of misguided design thinking. While it certainly didn't stand the test of time, it remains a testament to what happens when bold vision meets lackluster execution. The 1967 Gyro X is a curious relic from the automotive world, a concept that captured the imagination of many with its futuristic promise, yet faltered so spectacularly in execution that it became nothing more than a cautionary tale. The idea of a two-wheeled, self-balancing car seemed revolutionary at the time. After all, the world was enamored with the idea of innovative, futuristic vehicles that could transform the way we approach transportation. The Gyro X was one such idea, a car that would eliminate the traditional four wheels and instead use a gyro stabilization mechanism to keep it upright. It was a marvel of engineering, or at least it was supposed to be. The Gyro X had two wheels, one in the front and one in the rear, and these wheels were supposed to be stabilized by a complex gyroscopic system that would keep the car from falling over. It was the automotive equivalent of balancing on a tightrope without a safety net, and in theory it worked. The car could zip around corners, glide down straightaways, and even perform maneuvers like a motorcycle, leaning into turns in a way that no other vehicle could. To those who imagined a future filled with hovercraft-like vehicles, the Gyro X seemed like the next step, a vehicle that could perhaps be the pinnacle of balance and stability. But the reality? That's where the dream began to unravel. The gyro mechanism was extremely sensitive, requiring constant adjustment and precision to keep the car from tipping over. It was as if the vesicle's very survival depended on the cooperation of a series of fragile, interconnected systems, one of which was bound to fail. And fail it did. The gyroscope was prone to breaking down, leading to sudden loss of balance. In those moments, the car would act less like a futuristic machine and more like a falling object, hurtling towards the ground with little more than a prayer to save it. This unpredictability turned the Gyro X from a high-tech marvel into a mechanical nightmare. The very fact that the car was designed with only two wheels meant that it was already inherently unstable, even when the gyro system worked as intended. With no additional support from traditional wheels, it became more difficult to drive and steer than anyone could have imagined. Handling was awkward at best, and the gyroscopic balancing system didn't just keep the car upright, it made it incredibly difficult to control at higher speeds or on uneven terrain. Imagine trying to ride a bicycle with no handlebars. Only in the case of the Gyro X, it wasn't a bicycle, and the stakes were much higher. And then there was the design itself. The Gyro X had a sort of spaceship-like appearance, sleek, low to the ground, and futuristic, but in an odd and uncomfortable way. It was clear that the engineers and designers had a vision of something truly revolutionary, but in practice, it looked more like a strange prototype that belonged in a museum rather than on the roads. The car was meant to feel avant-garde, like something out of a sci-fi film, but it ended up feeling like an unfinished experiment, a vehicle that was all concept and no substance. The look was highly stylized, but with its odd proportions and awkward stance, it never truly found its place in the world of automotive design. It wasn't just impractical, it looked impractical. Despite its bold ambition, the Gyro X was financially doomed from the start. The company that created it, Gyro Transport Systems, ran into financial difficulties and could not secure the funds to continue development. After the car's production came to an end, only one Gyro X was ever built, leaving the dream of a self-balancing two-wheeled car to fade into obscurity. The car's brief existence did, however, earn it a certain notoriety as a concept car gone awry. Despite its failure, the Gyro X became a curiosity, a symbol of the futuristic possibilities of the 60s that never came to fruition. It's a classic example of a vehicle that tried to leap into the future too fast. Its promise was lofty, creating a car that could balance itself like a motorcycle, offering the freedom and agility of two wheels with the comfort and speed of a car. But the reality was much different. The Gyro X was a disaster in motion, an overly ambitious concept that couldn't live up to the expectations of its time. Its gyroscopic system, while groundbreaking, was simply too fragile, and the car's fundamental design issues made it less of a revolutionary vehicle and more of a technical curiosity. Today, the Gyro X is remembered as a symbol of what can go wrong when visionary thinking and engineering complexity collide. The car never reached the roads as a fully functional vehicle, and despite its futuristic intentions, it was just too unstable, too impractical, and too flawed to survive. In the grand scheme of automotive history, the 1969 Chevrolet Astro III is one of those cars that seems to exist purely in the realm of fantasy, a jet-powered, three-wheeled concept vehicle that promised to bring us into the future, but instead left us scratching our heads in confusion. Chevrolet's engineers were clearly thinking big when they designed this wild experiment. but they also overlooked some of the more fundamental elements of vehicle design in the process. The concept of the Astro III was to create something that looked like it came straight out of a sci-fi movie, and it certainly delivered in that regard. With its sleek, aerodynamic body, the Astro III resembled a rolling stealth bomber more than a car. Its low, sleek profile and jet engine screamed cutting-edge technology, and in many ways it was ahead of its time in terms of its futuristic aesthetic. But that's where the novelty ended, and the absurdity began. For starters, this was a three-wheeled car, an unconventional choice for any vehicle, let alone one intended to lead the charge into a new era of transportation. The single front wheel was the most glaring problem. While it might have looked cool on a concept board or in the design studio, it meant that the Astro III had terrible stability. This wasn't a car built for high-speed corners or real-world driving conditions. It was more of a showpiece, a rolling sculpture meant to dazzle people at auto shows rather than actually function in the real world. Then there was the jet engine. Chevrolet's idea was to include a jet turbine in the back of the vehicle, a nod to the technology of the future. While it might have sounded like a great idea on paper, it made the car practically unusable for any real-world application. Jet engines are loud, hot, and incredibly inefficient when it comes to driving on regular roads. Not to mention, with no side windows, the driver was left sitting in a confined, claustrophobic cockpit with little to no visibility or comfort. And let's not forget the fact that the jet engine would have burned through fuel like it was nothing, making the car impractical and expensive to run, even if it somehow did manage to move. And speaking of visibility, the lack of side windows on the Astro III made it borderline impossible to drive, unless you count the tiny narrow slits as acceptable substitutes for actual windows. It was a car designed more for aerodynamics than for the needs of a real driver, leaving you feeling like a pilot in a cockpit rather than a driver behind the wheel of a vehicle. Beyond that, the entire design of the vehicle was so impractical that it was basically doomed from the start. A jet-powered three-wheeler with little regard for the reality of road usage made no sense as a production car. It was a glimpse of a future that never came to pass. The Astro III was a statement piece, a bold idea that tried to imagine a future that was faster, sleeker, and cooler than anything anyone had ever seen. But when it came down to the practicalities of design, driving, and function, it fell apart in spectacular fashion. The Astro III was never meant for production, and rightfully so. It wasn't built to be driven on normal roads, nor was it designed with actual usability in mind. The car was a concept, pure and simple, and it failed spectacularly to make the leap from futuristic dream to functional vehicle. Chevrolet's bold experiment ended up being just that, an experiment, half-baked and impractical. The world wasn't ready for a jet-powered, three-wheeled, non-functional stealth bomber car, and frankly, it never would be. The 1969 Chevrolet Astro III is remembered today not as a vehicle that could have changed the future of transportation, but as a quirky, ambitious, and ultimately foolhardy attempt to push the boundaries of automotive design. It was a showstopper at the time, drawing attention for its boldness and uniqueness, but it failed to deliver any meaningful innovation beyond a brief flash of visual excitement. It was a vehicle that belonged to the world of concept cars, designed to stir imaginations, but with no real intention of ever becoming a practical reality. The 1955 Chrysler Gilda Streamline X Gilda is a car that holds a special place in automotive history. Not because of its practicality or its roadworthiness, but because of its sheer audacity in design. At a time when America was immersed in the post-war optimism of the 1950s, the future seemed full of endless possibilities. Automakers were competing fiercely to create cars that not only reflected the spirit of the times, but also pushed the boundaries of what was possible. And in the midst of this race to the future, Chrysler decided to partner with Italian design house Ghia to create something that would forever be etched in the annals of automotive history, not because it was the fastest or the most efficient, but because it was an idea ahead of its time in the most misguided way possible. The Streamline X Gilda was, in essence, Chrysler's vision of what the future of automotive design should look like. A sleek, jet-inspired concept car that combined a space-age aesthetic with the luxury of the finest cars of the era. It was as if Chrysler was trying to take the Art Deco elegance of the 1930s and marry it with the futuristic vision of what cars could become in a world full of Jetsons-like dreams. The car's shape was curvaceous, almost liquid-like, with rounded edges and fins that made it look like something from another planet. There was a distinct flow to its design, with the body panels seamlessly wrapping around the car like water flowing over a stone. The lack of sharp edges, the smooth contours, and the swooping curves gave the Gilda an otherworldly look. It was beautiful in its own way, but therein lay the problem. For all its beauty, the Gilda was utterly impractical. It had no functional engine, an absolutely critical flaw for a car that was meant to be driven. Instead, Chrysler and Ghia created a shell, a hollow, non-functional prototype that was designed purely to capture attention and showcase futuristic design principles. It was as if the car's creators were more focused on impressing with the form rather than thinking about functionality. It had no wheels that would turn, no drivetrain that would propel it forward. It was essentially an immobile showpiece. The car was, in its simplest form, a glorified sculpture, a piece of automotive art that had absolutely no intention of ever being used as a functional vehicle. The most glaring misstep in the design was the decision to forgo an engine entirely. The Gilda lacked even the most basic features that one would expect from any car, even a concept. No engine, no powertrain, no working mechanics of any kind. It was all visual appeal and little more. And yet, Chrysler showcased it proudly, hoping it would capture the imagination of the public and mark the company as a visionary in the rapidly changing landscape of automotive design. The car was unveiled as a luxurious, futuristic marvel, but it was little more than a fantasy that could never be realized in the real world. A fantasy that would remain permanently tethered to the past as a dream never fulfilled. Looking at the Gilda today, one might marvel at its boldness, at its unabashed vision, but it's impossible to ignore just how wrong it was in terms of practicality and use. There's a certain irony to a car that was built to represent the future, but was so rooted in fantasy that it never had any hope of actually being a functional vehicle. The Gilda was a car that couldn't drive, couldn't move, and had no real-world application. It was meant to be driven into the future, but it could only ever roll backwards as a cautionary tale about overestimating the importance of form over function. Despite its lack of functionality, the Gilda remains a masterpiece of automotive design, one that symbolizes the dreams and ambitions of an era that was looking to push the boundaries of what was possible. It was a bold, futuristic vision, albeit one with no grounding in reality. It was an example of unrestrained creativity, unburdened by the demands of practicality. It was a concept that tried to show us what the future of cars could look like, but without the necessary engineering or practicality to make it work. The 1955 Chrysler Ghia Streamline X Gilda exists today as a curiosity, a prototype that is as much about design philosophy as it is about engineering failure. And though it may have been a failure in terms of actual usability, it remains one of the most beautifully absurd creations in the history of automotive design. The Gilda wasn't meant to drive. It was meant to be seen, admired, and celebrated as a vision of the future that was never meant to be. It is a reminder that sometimes in the world of automotive design, beauty alone isn't enough. Sometimes practicality has to come along for the ride. The 1974 Fascination prototype was not merely a car, it was a conceptual catastrophe, a design experiment gone astray in the most spectacular fashion. If automotive history were a collection of strange and bizarre creatures, the Fascination would be the one that everyone stares at, but no one truly understands. This vehicle was an attempt at revolutionizing the future of transportation, but it was also a perfect example of how vision can sometimes go too far, venturing into realms where practicality and taste simply don't follow. Looking at it, the first thing you'll notice is its overly elongated nose, a feature that made the car look less like a vehicle and more like some sort of extraterrestrial insect. Inspired perhaps by the delicate and weirdly aerodynamic qualities of an insect's shape, the nose of the Fascination stretched far beyond what was considered acceptable, rendering the car almost comical in its proportions. A smooth, sleek exterior that should have been streamlined and practical became instead a disproportionate beak of sorts, unnecessarily elongating the profile and making the car look like it had evolved from a bad sci-fi movie set rather than an engineering concept. But the nose was only the beginning of its bizarre tale. The Fascination was built with just 3 wheels, defying traditional vehicular logic. Why? Perhaps in an attempt to be as avant-garde as possible, it aimed to break away from the typical 4-wheel format in favor of something closer to motorcycle aesthetics. More daring, more futuristic. But that didn't mean it was practical. The 3-wheel configuration gave the car an inherent instability, one that made it incredibly difficult to control on real roads. At high speeds, there was a constant sense that the car could tip over at any moment. And while this wasn't a deal breaker for designers, who no doubt believed in the superiority of their futuristic vision, it would prove to be an absolute nightmare for the people who had to drive it, assuming anyone ever would. The 3-wheel design was more than just impractical. It was indicative of the Fascination's fundamental failure as a roadworthy car. Instead of enhancing the car's handling or its stability, the 3rd wheel simply made it feel unbalanced. The decision to abandon the well-established 4-wheel configuration wasn't an innovation. It was a misstep that would make even the most seasoned engineers shake their heads in confusion. And then there was the bubble canopy. This too was meant to be an embodiment of futuristic thinking, but it took things a step too far. It looked more like a space capsule than something that could actually fit into the normal landscape of car designs. The canopy wasn't merely impractical, it was claustrophobic, giving the driver an odd feeling of being in a sealed-off capsule. The design took visibility to a whole new level of poor judgment, as the narrow bubble forced the driver into a compromised field of vision, almost like sitting inside a fishbowl. The air of futurism the canopy was meant to evoke quickly turned to discomfort and distrust, and what was supposed to make the car look sleek and space-age simply made it look like an overly dramatic, poorly executed gimmick. And let's not forget the underlying issue that plagued the entire design. It wasn't functional. The designers envisioned this car as a breakthrough in transportation, something that would redefine the way we think about personal mobility. But instead of creating a practical solution for the future, the Fascination felt more like a fashion statement gone horribly wrong. It wasn't the kind of car you could drive to work, nor was it a car that could meet the most basic demands of daily life. Its futuristic nature was purely aesthetic, offering little to no usable performance or comfort. Worse still, it was a money pit, an impractical experiment that ended up costing the company more than they could afford. Built as a prototype, only 5 models of the Fascination were made. Only 1 prototype remains in existence today, but no one ever drove it enough to make it relevant. After the company went bankrupt and their idea was abandoned, the Fascination was left to fade into obscurity, where it would remain a quirky reminder of automotive history gone off the rails. The car's designers may have had grand plans. They may have imagined a world where the Fascination would redefine the roads, but reality simply didn't agree. In hindsight, the Fascination was nothing more than a failed experiment that had more in common with a fantasy than with any car we'd ever see on the roads. It was a vision of a world that never was, and while it could have been viewed as innovative in an idealistic sense, it was ultimately unsustainable and absurd. The car simply couldn't function in the real world. It was impractical, unsafe, and entirely unfit for purpose. Yet it holds a special place in the annals of automotive history. The 1956 Buick Centurion concept stands out as one of the most audacious, eccentric attempts at automotive innovation during the 1950s, yet it ultimately revealed how a visionary idea can quickly become an over-the-top misfire. On paper, the Centurion was meant to represent the pinnacle of futuristic technology and design, a bold statement of Buick's commitment to pushing the boundaries of automotive engineering. In reality, it was a visionary flop, one of those ideas that sounded great in theory, but fell short of expectation when it hit the road, or more accurately, when it sat stationary as a prototype. Perhaps the most radical feature of the Centurion was its rear-view camera system, which replaced the conventional rear-view mirror. This was a concept so far ahead of its time that it would only be truly practical decades later, with the advent of backup cameras in the modern era. In the 1950s, however, the technology simply wasn't refined enough to make it work as intended. The TV camera was a novel idea, but it was also a practical nightmare. The picture was grainy at best, and the screen was prone to malfunctioning, hardly ideal for a system designed to offer better visibility when reversing. Instead of the 1973 Reliant Robin stands as a classic example of a vehicle that was more remembered for its absurdities and flaws than for its merits. In fact, this three-wheel car is arguably the butt of many automotive jokes, often cited as one of the most impractical and unstable cars ever built. While it's not as common in the US, the Reliant Robin became a legendary punchline across Britain, a place where it was often associated with comedy sketches, slapstick humor, and even television shows like Top Gear, where its infamy reached new heights. The Reliant Robin was an attempt by the British automaker Reliant Motors to create a cheap, small car for budget-conscious consumers. Its quirky design featured two front wheels and a single rear wheel, a configuration that made it stand out, but also made it dangerously prone to tipping. The three-wheel design wasn't new. Reliant had built similar cars before, but this iteration became infamous because of how horrible the handling was, especially when navigating corners or uneven terrain. It became known as a car that would flip over if you weren't careful when turning, or even driving too fast on a straight road. It was so prone to tipping that, on many occasions, drivers would have to worry about the car's stability more than anything else. Even a slight bump in the road or a tight turn could send the car into a dangerous roll, something that became a staple joke in British popular culture. This severe instability earned the Robin the nickname the tipping car, and for good reason. The design of the Reliant Robin only added to its reputation. Its rounded, bulbous body looked more like a cartoonish object than a serious vehicle. The car's proportions were awkward, with the front wheels placed far apart and the rear wheel practically tucked under the back. The small, squished appearance made it look like a toy car designed by a child with a crayon, which only increased its ridicule. Not only was it unbalanced, but it also lacked a rear stabilizing wheel, meaning that there was almost no way to prevent the car from tipping in difficult situations. Its performance was another major letdown. Under the hood, the tiny 750cc engine was less about speed and more about economy. It didn't exactly set the world on fire with its performance, producing only a modest amount of horsepower. Driving the Robin was more of an experience of sluggish acceleration and sloppy handling than any kind of thrilling ride. The suspension was soft, but that just meant the car floated like a balloon rather than providing the stability needed for a proper ride. For all the people who needed a cheap and practical vehicle that could save money at the gas pump, it served its purpose in terms of economy. However, the sheer lack of comfort and performance made it a tough sell for anyone who wasn't in dire need of a basic vehicle. While the Reliant Robin wasn't designed with performance in mind, its biggest flaw was handling. The combination of top-heavy structure, narrow wheelbase, and overall lightweight construction made it incredibly prone to tipping over, especially in turns or at high speeds. The smallest of maneuvers would send it wobbling and potentially tipping, causing headaches for anyone who drove it. This is what made it a target of ridicule. Top Gear famously flipped one over in a staged stunt, solidifying the Robin's reputation as a laughingstock in automotive circles. While it wasn't exactly meant for high-performance driving, the simple fact that the Robin couldn't safely handle turns made it almost impossible to take seriously as a car. On the streets, the Reliant Robin became an object of mockery. While it was the butt of jokes, it also gained the ire of other motorists who saw it as a nuisance on the road. Its three-wheeled setup was a glaring oddity, and it wasn't something that you could easily ignore while driving. Despite being a relatively cheap car to own and operate, with minimal repair costs and decent fuel efficiency, it was essentially a running joke that could never shake off the shame of its instability. To make matters worse, the Robin was also notorious for its rusting issues. Its lightweight body didn't hold up well against the British weather, further diminishing its credibility. However, despite all its faults, the Reliant Robin still had a loyal following among those who appreciated its simplicity and affordability. It wasn't the car you drove if you wanted to impress anyone. It wasn't the car you drove if you wanted to be taken seriously. but it was the car you drove if you had nowhere else to turn, if you needed a cheap and functional way to get from point A to point B without breaking the bank. In a way, it became a kind of symbol for practical, low-cost transportation in a world that was beginning to move away from such vehicles.